All right. Catch music as always. You guys started. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on LinkedIn Live for another edition of Talk Data to Me. My name is Hank Schless. I'm Director of Global Security Campaigns here at Lookout and happy to be joined again on the show with our Chief Strategy Officer, Aaron Cockrell. Aaron, thank you for taking the time as always.
Hi, Hank. Good to be here.
So, Aaron, today the topic is ransomware, but in the context of the hybrid work environment, right? And I think everyone can agree, and you and I were talking about this yesterday. Ransomware is a pretty popular topic these days for good reason. So I was
Yep.
thinking maybe we could save the audience kind of the typical scary stats they're used to being bombarded with, and kind of get straight to the valuable and helpful topics. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that'd be great. But I think maybe we should sort of, well, first, I think it's a bad reason that ransomware is so popular. But the thing that we should also help the audience understand what is meant by ransomware. The name's a little bit misleading. Um, in our industry, when you say something is, like surveillanceware, that typically means that it's a individual package of software that does something like perform surveillance.
Right.
Ransomware attacks are nothing like that. Ransomware attacks involve a chain of events that ultimately result in the theft and encryption of data, but it's not one individual package of software. And I think the name results in a bit of a misleading concept for a lot of people until they actually end up being attacked.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important distinction to draw, especially because as we'll get into here, kind of thinking about what you can do about it, having that mindset, understanding what it really means is obviously important. So, from your opinion and your point of view as someone that kind of sits in that strategy role and has a very strong finger on the state of the cybersecurity market ecosystem, however you want to say it, why do you think ransomware is affecting companies so seemingly so frequently and badly in this new hybrid work environment? And do you think it's sort of is it a matter of it just being the latest iteration of effective cybercrime, or is there actually something more to it?
No, there's more to it. There's two parts to it. As I mentioned, ransomware is a organized attack, and we've seen, reported in the press. You can even uh, purchase ransomware as a service and so on. So a couple of things have happened. One is it became more accessible by uh, less sophisticated attackers. They could rent the service, if you like. But that's not really related to the fact that it's increased during this hybrid work environment. The significant reasons why it's increased during this hybrid work environment evolution for the way that we work is the first stage of almost any attack, but very much ransomware, is all about trying to gain access to your sensitive data. And the way that that's typically done these days is either you purchase credentials from the dark web or you run phishing campaigns against the people of the target organization. And as a result of everyone adopting a hybrid work environment, phishing has become far more, unfortunately, far more prevalent and far more successful.
Right.
A big reason for that is because employees used to be behind a corporate firewall, and in that corporate firewall or in that corporate perimeter, there was a secure web gateway or other firewall capabilities that would filter out malicious links, and secure email gateways that would filter out phishing emails. But these days, in the way that hybrid workers are being attacked from a phishing perspective is frequently over their personal social media and on devices that are unprotected by that corporate perimeter. So that's the first thing. The bad actors are gaining access to systems that they found more difficult to gain access to previously because of this phishing problem. The second one is, and if you look at the statistics, the predominant, so when a bad actor gains access to sensitive data, still even today, that's most frequently through exploiting databases that reside on servers. Now, you would think, hang on, we've all moved to the cloud. Why are they still attacking these like Windows servers or Linux servers that are running
Mhm.
databases and so on. And the reason is because frequently, in order to enable this transition to a hybrid work environment, and companies have had to what they call lift and shift. So take those
Yep.
servers and stick them up into infrastructure as a service in order to make them accessible for the people that are working from home. So, and that's done, unfortunately, frequently with less experience, let's say, than how things were secured behind a regular perimeter. And often those servers were not hardened in preparation to be internet facing, or the infrastructure that they're running on, the containers that they're running in, are misconfigured. And so the bad actors are taking advantage of infrastructure as a service, in some cases even SaaS, software as a service, misconfigurations to gain access to either servers that have been lifted and shifted up into the cloud, or the adoption of SaaS services that have not been, hardened with relation to configurations, and that gets them access to data that they would not have been able to access had everything still be sitting behind a perimeter.
Right, and to a degree, I mean, there's so much complexity now between between the, like you mentioned, giving access to people who are working from anywhere. But then on top of that, you just look at the number of sort of like a force multiplier of the other, the number of apps that, and SaaS apps, platforms, all this stuff that we're all using anyways, and then you add on this additional layer of taking stuff that wasn't originally built for this environment and having to make it accessible to this environment. And in some cases, I mean, they're vulnerabilities out there, whatever, they've been out there for years.
Yes.
And they just, and to your point about some of those, maybe some of those older systems, they're just, they're either just, it's so tough for those teams to know that they are still there.
Yep.
So they may be vulnerable that way, but it's also just having the ability to see all of that in one place is so tough.
Yep, I agree. There's one that I didn't mention
Yeah.
that I probably should add. We, and I know I've said it before on in this forum, but the continued use of VPNs results in access that we should try and close down. But I've said that before, so we'll move on.
Yeah, we have a whole other episode on that. We could go down that rabbit hole for a while. So let's keep it here on the ransomware topic. So, to your point, you mentioned ransomware as a service earlier. I think everyone is kind of at this point is aware of how, whether you call it ransomware as a service, malware as a service, even phishing as a service is a thing. There are all these things out there that basically adopted the service-based software model for malicious intent, right? And a lot of times the groups building these service-based pieces of malware, or in the case of ransomware, kind of complex attack chains, are basically treating it like a small business would. But the interesting thing is that we ran some information or a survey earlier this year, and as is up on the screen now, apparently only about 57% of security leaders expect ransomware to compromise their organization. Now, I do think that's it's a significant percentage. I think it's, I would have maybe expected to be a little higher given, the current sort of risk environment. But the positive thing is that it shows, at least in my opinion, that it's more than 50%. It is the majority of security leaders who are kind of proactively preparing themselves for ransomware in what to me sounds a little bit like a, hope for the best, prepare for the worst situation. And with, I think that part of that is sort of aligned with the growth of the ransomware as a service market. So with that fact in mind, I'd actually like to flip it a little bit. And I don't know, Aaron, do you have any kind of common myths that you hear that are associated with ransomware? It was sort of set the bar with what ransomware actually is, but what do you think people really need to be thinking about, or things that people think about it that maybe are or are not actually reality?
Yeah. I guess the first one I would say is backup is not enough to get you back from a ransomware attack. I think most leaders most IT leaders will understand that simply getting you can't reactivate production systems from backups, the whole certificate problem. There's a bunch of reasons why you can't just, so you need to have not just a backup strategy, but a complete failover strategy in order to properly and rapidly recover from a ransomware attack. But that's just the crippling thing that they've done when it came to stealing your data and locking it up and so on. That's the first one. Backups are not enough. The second one is, once that you've gotten your systems back running, they've still got your data, and so and this is what they use as leverage for being paid. And paying the ransom frequently doesn't get your data back. In fact, we've got, I think it was Sophos published statistics that only about 65% of organizations actually get their data back once they do pay a ransom. And there's a lot of reasons for that. If you look at the software that the companies use for ransomware attacks, they are companies, but the bad actors use for ransomware attacks, they'll use different packages for different encryption in different systems. They'll frequently do the encryption at different times with different keys. And it's not like, you're just sticking in a key and decrypting a singular blob. They have a quite elegant way for you to pay using Bitcoin. They haven't invested quite as much in their customer experience in actually getting your data back. The next one, IT engineers can decrypt the data. That's just so the people that work inside your organization can somehow recover from this encryption. That's highly unlikely. The next is, I have a firewall and antivirus in place. This is frequently not about malware. So if you think about it, the bad actors try and get into your organization from social engineering or stolen credentials and so on. They move laterally until they find GUI center big database that looks like it's valuable. The first thing they do is exfiltrate that data, and then they attempt to encrypt it. The only time that malware really gets used in that chain of events is typically to install a way to retain access, remote access to systems that got you along that lateral movement chain to retain access into that organization. The actual phishing campaigns, as well as the actual encryption of data, is not necessarily even deemed as malware by a lot of systems. So detecting it from a malware or antivirus perspective isn't going to be that effective. And then the last one is that it only impacts the infected device. That comes back to the whole definition of the word ransomware. It's a coordinated attack across firstly access to your systems, then lateral movement between systems, until ultimately the bad actors gain access to data repositories that are sufficiently valuable to extort you for money. So it's a myth to think that it just impacts one device, which also comes back to the whole why antivirus is not enough. Now, look, I'm not saying that we don't need it. You absolutely do. There's this whole defense in depth strategy that I totally endorse, but just relying on detection of malicious software is not going to save you from ransomware.
100%. And I agree, especially I kind of actually want to dig in a little bit on that point that you just made in the context of this article you and I were talking about yesterday from Gartner on how to detect and prevent ransomware. And one thing they note is that the best point, in their opinion, to detect these attacks is actually in that lateral movement stage. So to your point, it's not, when there's a certain piece of malware installed or whatever it may be, right? It's when the actor is maybe acting, abnormally under the guise of the legit employee that they've, logged in as because they stole these credentials. But what do you think? Do you think that's, do you think that's true? That kind of, looking
Yeah.
for them in that lateral movement stage is a good place to do it. And maybe any other sort of places that people may not think of along that ransomware attack chain that would be good to keep an eye on.
So I do believe that the best, I think most security professionals will agree that the best time to capture or detect a bad actor attempting to employ a ransomware attack is during that lateral movement stage. That the other term that we use for that lateral movement stage, or the term dwell time, is that's the time that they're in your system before they're detected and but these days, in the way a ransomware attack works, frequently your detection is unfortunately the point at which they're extorting you. So
Right.
so lateral movement is a good time or a good way to try and detect them. However, lateral movement is, in my the way I would say it is, I would look to employ systems that also detect anomalous data use, because as I mentioned, it's a two-step process. The exfiltration of the data and ultimately the encryption of the data and the extortion of the organization.
Right.
They can often be quite separate from a timing perspective as well. And anomalous data usage, like tools like user and entity behavioral analytics, UEBA. I hate the acronyms we have to use in our industry, but that is a very effective tool to identify anomalous data use. So that's another tool that you can use, for example, to identify if someone is attempting to exfiltrate your data. And even if because most of the good ones do it in small chunks to not fire up warning lights and so on, but good UEBA system will identify anomalous data use, and that's in addition to the typical detections that you would use for lateral movement. I guess the other things that I would talk about are making sure that the systems that you use, and coming back to these servers that I talked about that are the typical targets for ransomware, put them behind infrastructure that allows them to be segregated. Again, unfortunate acronym in this industry, Zero Trust Networking Access. This is often referred to as a VPN replacement, but the great part of that technology is that it causes the applications that weren't built for being necessarily internet facing to be only connected individually through a brokering system. So it makes it far more difficult for those systems to be attacked, especially using legitimate credentials and being used for lateral movement, because the credentials will only get you access to that individual piece of infrastructure. So they're the things that I would focus on in terms of trying to detect and prevent ransomware, or at least reduce your likelihood of being attacked.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think that's probably a good spot to wrap things up on here, Aaron. Thank you, as always, for joining us, and thank you everybody who tuned in for Talk Data to Me. If you would like to kind of learn a little bit more about what you can do to mitigate the risk of ransomware, click the link in the post. There's always information there. We're always here to be helpful. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Aaron, and we'll see everybody soon on another episode of Talk Data to Me. Have a good one.